It is now recording.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. We're live now? Okay. I will assume so. Welcome to Water is Alive, reflections on ways to recognize water as a spirited being with agency. My name is Bayha. I'll be chairing today's session, but to begin, I'd like to turn it over to Elder Isobel White, who I'll introduce more formally, including pronouncing her nation's name appropriately. But we'd like to start with a prayer, as is appropriate. So Elder White, if you would.
Daigle. That's my Anishinaabe name, Daigle, and Isobel White, and Ying, Nimiteo, Makwa, Dote. Bear clan, and I have 2 times Metewan, and I'm sitting in my bedroom, and that's where I got the best in reception, because I got somebody to come and help me. So she said that it's better to put it where all the stuff are, my internet. So I have here with me is my traditional drum in the bedroom, and I did put tobacco in the traditional drum for us. And I have water here that I'll be drinking for every one of you. So I'll say a prayer. Oh, so Ashna me na oe. Bimiga wechi migo oe nichine seg oega wita shindamang oe nibe. I'm saying that we will be talking about this sacred water, Manitoaba, that everything will go well, that the spirit in the water will listen to us. Hey, Gigagi Sumin, Manito Mayan, Atsukan Mayan, we Nichibisin Toyang, Wega we en toang oe, keep mixture. Nan the mangi mixture. Shawan the mang oenibe. I'm speaking about the water, how we honor it, how grateful we are to have water. Misian de shigigit hatsu kanak. Misiat oeget de magaya keep it next time chuichi. Bisentak. And so I'm also talking about the other spirits that are all over, and also my drum, the drum that I have that will be listening, and the kagi pishoen mitke. Also can see being at my spirit that works with me, that helps me when I do my prayers. I'm thanking me, yeah. Shoen mishnam. That's so kan. Me, yeah, she got a gig on. When can't get pansi. So what I'm saying is help us, love us. Me, Gwetch, thank you. And I will not be closing this meeting. It will go on. It'll still be going. So there'll be no closing after. Oh, me, Gwetch. Me, yeah.
Masicho, Miigwech, Elder White. So my name is Bayha. I'm Metro Denny and Deniza. I come to you from the western edge of Treaty Number 8. First of all, logistical, we're digital these days, so if people could be sure to mute their microphones. And just to confirm, people can hear me? I'm off grid. I'm coming from a cell phone. Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now you're muted, Caleb.
This is the curse of being with the phone. So I'm coming from West Moberly First Nations, my mom's reserve. And I'm just going to offer some opening remarks, but I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, thank the sponsors. So Decolonizing Water Governance, of which I was a founding member, the Indigenous Legal Traditions Committee, Aimée, at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law, Masicho, CELA, the Center for Environmental Law and Global Sustainability, Decolonizing Water Governance, the Collective, Northern Water Futures, I'm trying to get this all, the UNESCO Food, Biodiversity, and Sustainability Studies crew, the Grand Council of Treaty 3, Masicho, thank you, Witch, and the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective. What we're going to do today is go through 3 case studies to really explore this topic of water as alive and as a spirited being. And I want to emphasize spirited. I think there's some profundity there that we need to engage. This is part of the deep water conversations through decolonizing water governance. I wasn't sure how to introduce because I'm trying to keep an eye on time, and I'm cognizant that people, we have a lot to cover. But first of all, logistically, we're going to go through 3 case studies after introduction from Kat on legal personhood. We'll talk about the Namibia Declaration. We'll talk about, and again, apologies to, I'll use the English colonized human that I am, the Watchman of Great Bear Lake as a case study, and then the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective. After which we'll have a discussion. Logistically speaking, we're going to keep the chat off until we get to the discussion point, and after which there should be 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a wrap-up opportunity for everybody just to give some closing remarks and thoughts. Masicho, Isobel, for starting us off in a good way. Not wanting to take too much time, all I wanted to say is one, to my left over my shoulder, you will see a paddle that has only been used at the Paddles for the Peace, which is the river that's been dammed repeatedly and is being dammed again right now. And I come to you from my mom's res. So if you look there, which is quite interesting because the sun literally just rose, what you're looking at is Moberly Lake, the view that I have right now. This is the lake that I've lived in front of. It's the only consistent view I've ever had in my entire life, given how many times I've moved. And this is the lake and the water body that's being destroyed as we speak by the Site C Dam. I used to be the chair of the Keepers of the Water. I was, again, like a founding member of the Decolonizing Water Governance Project and the Collective. I used to be the special advisor on water to the Assembly of First Nations. I now work as the legal policy advisor to the national chief, primarily focused on the UN Declaration and its application in Canadian law. But I also live on the res to the extent that I can. And as we talk about water and legal personhood, what I wanted to say both to this panelist, but also to those attending, is that we live in a time where we really have to think about deeply our interface with others. This is the time of masks. This is the time of unprecedented legal changes to how we relate to each other. I'm sure many of you, particularly those in Ontario and Quebec, are under lockdown orders right now. A lot of nations, so my dad's nation, which is 400 kilometers that way from me, they're under lockdown as well, especially I think in the NWT, the borders are closed, as I understand it. This is a time where our relationship, not only to one another, but to the world writ large, matters. And one thing that, especially the colonial legal structure, because I come from a legal perspective, but I'm living on the res and I'm close to my mom and my grandma who's having challenges. Hence being here. I think that as a collective, as beings, we need to deeply think about what our relationship to one another is and what our relationship is to other ways of knowing and understanding the world around us. I'm sitting in front of a lake being actively destroyed by probably unsustainable, financially, an unsustainable dam in the middle of a sacrifice zone that's been violated repeatedly by the rapacious sort of colonial extractive agenda And I think a lot of the people here will have some experience with that, whether it's the giant mine in the NWT, whether it's, water diversion projects in the prairies, whether it's what's happened to Lake Winnipeg, I think of Treaty 3 and those territories and the dam issues and others. And what I wanted to say is that as we begin today and as we go into these case studies and then have dialogue amongst us, digital though it may be, I wanted to remind people of how tangible and how real these things are. Like this is a poignant and for me very sad reminder of not only what's best in the world and what my ancestors protected and saved, but also what's at risk. And whilst I'm inclined to lean towards a legal characterization, I'm inclined towards looking at law and legal systems as a way to engage. Elder Isobel, you mentioned the Atsukan. There are other ways to understand, and I think that's critical. So this dialogue is a part of that work, and I'm honored and grateful to be a part of that. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Kat Ying, who I'll give you a brief bio. Thank you, Kat. Who obtained her JD from the University of Ottawa. Congratulations, where she's currently studying civil law. And I gather you're in Mohawk territory at the moment. She's dedicated to social and environmental justice, and she's a settler of Chinese and European descent living in Teotihuacan, I think is how it's pronounced. My Mohawk is quite poor, but in Montreal. So with that, I will turn it over to Kat to give us some background on personhood as a concept. And so we go forward.
Okay, thank you, Caleb. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. I'm a quite visual thinker, so I've prepared some slides. I hope that helps a few other people as well. Sorry, I thought I was going to be a later speaker, so I wasn't actually prepared. Let me just remember how to do that. Someone just showed me how to do this. There we go. Is that working?
Yes, it looks great. It's beautiful. You're doing great.
Okay, so yeah, I'm really honored to be here to talk about the potential for legal personhood in a Western legal system framework. So I want to begin by just acknowledging that or recognizing the importance, the reason why it's important for Western legal systems to reconceptualize water. So in Canada, at least, there are at least two reasons why it's really important that Western legal systems reconceptualize water. And the first, they really come back to a repairing relationship. So the first is reconciliation and returning to our original agreements with the Indigenous people of these territories and reconciling our legal systems with Indigenous legal systems. And the second is repairing our relationship with nature, especially in light of the current climate crisis. So a fundamental part of the Western legal framework is the Western worldview is that water is considered res externa. That is something that is separate and treated as subordinate to human activity. So many critics, for example, Bourassa de Sousa Santos and other Indigenous scholars and Global South scholars have questioned whether this very worldview is actually sustainable. So I just want to kind of deconstruct. I think it's important for Western thinkers, whether we identify as Westerners or not. I'm using the word Western, but it's also ironic because I come from the East. But anyway, to deconstruct our own legal system and figure out where we've gone wrong. So the idea of water as an object and the way that Western legal systems, whether it's the common legal system or the civil legal system, treats water dates back to the Roman Empire's treatment of water, which categorized water as either res nullius, that is like a thing that belongs to nobody and can be therefore appropriated by anybody, or res publica, which is a thing that belongs to the public and is therefore governed by the state, and res communis, which is a thing that belongs to the collective and therefore cannot be appropriated by anybody. And throughout Western traditions, water has flowed through all of these categories and sometimes was even considered a sacred thing. So the idea of res communis is a very, the idea of conceptualizing water as res communis is pretty common in our current water laws. Although the idea of treating nature as res communis kind of fell out of fashion as we moved towards more privatization and favoring market-based solutions, which was really supported by this myth of the tragedy of the commons, that the idea that something that's held in common, will not be managed sustainably or effectively, which was popularized by an article that has since been disproved by economists such as Eleanor Ostrom. So that's been one shift towards moving back to thinking of things as a commons. Also, the international declarations of human rights, which acknowledge a right to water, has moved toward, has like really put into the spotlight the idea that we need to think of water as res communis. In Quebec in 2009, there was the act to affirm the collective nature of water, which restated that water is a thing that is collective and cannot be appropriated, that is owned by anybody. But even then, there's certain caveats, and we still accept the bottling and transportation and selling of water out of one watershed system into another. So the limit of this, so this is kind of like, I think, the dominant way of thinking about water in the Western framework. And the limitation of this is that we're still thinking of water as res externa. That is something that is separate and treated as subordinate to human activity. So the alternative to that would be to think of water as a person itself, which is a concept that already exists in the Western legal frameworks. We grant legal personhood to corporations, to municipalities. It's been granted to ships in the past. And this is kind of like one tool. Legal personhood can be seen as one tool from the rights of nature toolbox. And it was really well articulated and popularized by law professor Christopher Stone's article, Should Trees Have Standing, where he very clearly articulated that maybe we need to also give nature a voice in our legal system. So there's so in my work, my research over the summer identified 3 pathways with a mind to the Canadian legal system that legal personhood for water could be recognized. And the first is constitutional, second is legislative, and the third is judicial, although really all 3 of them work in combination with one another. So to begin with constitutional change, the most exemplar case is Ecuador's Constitution of 2008, because it explicitly recognized the rights of Pachamama and bestowed upon every individual citizen the agency to represent and defend Mother Nature in the case of damages. So this really changes the perspective, a human use perspective on water. So it's not merely about conserving nature for human enjoyment. It's not about preserving water for, or more effective and more sustainable management of water for human use, but giving a voice to nature and to water for its own sake. Other constitutions have implicitly recognized the rights of nature by recognizing either in the way that they recognize collective rights, so in the way that they state that water is a collective source, that everyone has a right to it. In the way that that's stated, there's an implicit understanding or an implicit assumption that water must have and nature must have rights of its own. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So there's also a legislative recognition. So for example, the Waganui River was recognized as a legal person that owns itself and is now governed and is now represented by a board, which is comprised of a member of the Crown and of Indigenous people. And I do want to mention here that I don't want to over glorify the role of legal personhood as a tool in the Western framework and give it too much credit in that success, because for two reasons. First of all, is that recognizing or acknowledging or representing the Waganui River as a legal person came about after centuries of struggle, perseverance, and ingenuity on the part of the Iwi people. And using the legal personhood in the Western legal system was really just a small bridge to including an Iwi worldview and protecting the water. I don't want to say that, because of this one single tool this happens, although it was necessary, so many other things were necessary for this. And the second reason is that we should really take a sober approach to what this tool is capable of doing, and recognize that many critics have mentioned that the Waganui River, representing it as a legal person, has been more of a compromise than it has been an accurate representation. Because, for example, Iwi people say the river is me and I am the river, which doesn't, and saying that the river is a legal person is still kind of treating it as a separate entity from the people, and so it doesn't fully capture the more fundamental interconnection. So it is a compromise. It's not a full manifestation of the Iwi belief system. And then also in the States, there have been on a municipal level examples where people have recognized, have attempted to use municipal power to recognize rights of nature or rights of manifestations of nature, such as Lake Erie. But these have mostly failed because of two reasons. One, just the hierarchical nature of American legal system. Municipal law is often quashed by higher powers, and also that on a legislative level, there's so many stakeholders who are interested, who do not want nature to have its own rights because they're already competing with other users, right? And we can definitely see in Canada where, which is a very export-based extractionist state and economy, this is an obstacle that is going to have to be overcome, and it's gonna if we try to recognize rights of nature and especially rights of water in Canada, there's going to be this pushback here as well. So not the most optimistic but realistic approach. And then the other pathway is through court judgments. The court plays an important role in two ways. One is interpreting and applying any constitutional or legal changes that are successful. For example, the constitutional declaration that Pachamama has rights in Ecuador requires competent courts to apply and to competently interpret and apply that. The first famous case was a success. The court did recognize that the river had rights of its own, and decreed that and ordered that developers clean up the damage. However, there's been problems with enforcement. The cleanup has not actually happened. And also studies on the numerous cases that have been filed on behalf of Mother Nature in Ecuador show that there is still a kind of incompetence of decision makers to really hold and apply a different worldview. While they do employ the language of rights of nature as opposed to rights to nature, on like a more detailed examination of their reasoning, they're still applying a worldview that sees water as res externa, and they're balancing the rights of users and not fully including the rights of nature. So when we look to, could we use this tool here in Canada to, create a bridge between two different legal systems, or the Western legal system and the numerous Indigenous legal systems? Could it be used as a bridge? There's, I think there is still potential, as long as we recognize that it's a bridge and not a fix-all solution. And of course, we need to be very aware of the time it would take and the education it would take to really change, because it's not simply introducing a new tool to use the tool effectively. We're really asking that people change their fundamental worldview and to see water not as something subordinate, separate and subordinate to human activity, but as something that is integral and plays and has a presence in our legal system and has rights in our legal system. So there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead, but I hope that that's a nice kind of, there's so much to include in this. But I think what I want to offer from a Western perspective is that Western thinkers, we need to also know where we're coming from, and to be able to deconstruct and criticize our own worldview if we're going to get into right relationship both with the Indigenous people of these territories and with nature too. So hope it wasn't too pessimistic.
That was great, Kat. Thank you so much. Cognizant of time, we're about 5 minutes behind at this point. I'm going to turn it over now to the first case study. Thank you for that background, Kat. And this is about the Neville Declaration. So first of all, to introduce our panelists, Elder Isobel White, who's a knowledge-keeping elder from Note-Kamagwaning, I think is how it's pronounced. First Nation. Masicho.
Yeah.
Doing my best, my lady. She's known as a leader in water protection in Treaty 3. She's a member of the Treaty 3 Women's Council. I think I had the honor of meeting you actually some time ago, discussing the declaration and the Neville work. And she was instrumental in moving that work and the Neville Declaration, the Anishinaabe Nation Treaty 3 forward. So she'll be one of our panelists. The other one is Professor Aimée Craft, who many of you know. So I will just sort of like do a very brief bio. Associate professor in the Faculty of Law at University of Ottawa, Anishinaabe Métis lawyer from Manitoba, and internationally recognized leader in the area of Indigenous laws, treaties, and water. We actually met years ago at UVic Law. It was quite an interesting moment at a student-led camp where someone had brought an example of script documents and was discussing them with about 150 students and community members. And Aimée responded to this person in a chiff and was saying, like, that is my grandmother's script. So her connection is profound. I've always been very, very impressed and very humbled by some of the moments I've seen her throw down. She's prioritized Indigenous-led and interdisciplinary research, including visual arts and films. She co-leads a series of major research grants in the Decolonizer Governance Group, of course, and works with many nations, I think both in Canada and abroad, on the relationships and responsibilities to water. And then there's more I would add, but I think that's a good introduction for the two of you. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes, and if you could discuss the Neville Declaration as a first case study, I would appreciate it. Masicho, over to you.
Caleb.
Is it Aimée?
Elder Isobel, you go first.
Oh, so how much do we have
10 minutes or so.
together?
Yeah. But you
What?
say what you need to
Okay.
say, and then I'll use any time that's left.
Okay. Okay. I'm honored to share our work that we did with Treaty 3. So I was on Women's Council between 2015 to 19. And we worked on the NIBID declaration, and it's right here. This is what we worked on. And when we do work, or when we talk about creation, we always have to be very careful. We are very careful. We have to know our boundaries, and we can't overdo, more like going overboard with the creator. Like the creator gave us all these tools, the creation, everything that we have. So we're always being careful that we don't misuse, or, they always, like in the old days, I remember they always say Hangwamizin. Hangwamizin means, be careful. Hangwamizin. They always use that word. So when we when we first talked about the Nibet Declaration, we had a few meetings, and what we needed, the foremost is to consult with elders. So we did. It didn't take us overnight. It took us, I say, 2 or 3 years, because we had to consult with elders. We met with elders. We had regional meetings, and so that's how we went by with all the information we collected. And because I was raised in very traditional, I knew we had to be careful. So when we did the declaration, there was towards, once we collected all the information, all the meetings we met with again with a group of elders, and a ceremony. A ceremony was held, feasting the water, saying thank you to the Creator before anything was completed. So when we say Nibid Declaration, it was in May of 2019 that it was completed. And that's when we took it to the National Forum, Treaty 3 National Forum. And there it was ratified by the membership Treaty 3 and all the participants. It was ratified. It was unanimously ratified, and this is it. So when we talk about Nibe, the creation, there's always there's a spirit, Hatsokan. There's Hatsokan in there that we have to respect. So we have to respect that hot sokan. And the hot sokan gives us life every single day of our lives. We use that nibbe. I say first thing in the morning, the first day we were born, you know, and it's always, you know, first thing in the morning, that's where we go to. However it is, you know, clean, coffee, you know, that's the first thing we run to. And that's giving us life. It gives us life. And through this pandemic, I've since March, I've taken that cedar tea. And I think not all the time, but there are times that I thank the spirit in there that comes with the water, helping me, you know, so this pandemic, this virus, it keeps it away. That's how sacred the water is. So when we say sacred, you know, it gives life, you know, with all of creation. And we all have, you know, a relationship, and that's what I mean. We all have a relationship. And I was listening to the presenter, you know, it's a person. You know, I heard her say that right away. I thought of, you know, the spirit in there. And and you know, I thought of, you know, when I talk about creation, I thought of how do we when we explore, you know, she talked about the river. You know, I thought of the sacred water. And there's petroforms in our area, out in a lake. We go by lake to reach those petroforms. So I thought of them. So when I think about those petroforms, they're still gonna be there years, generations ahead. How can we, you know, she talked about the law, you know, how can we make them law? And I thought about even keeping them alive by, you know, like we're recording here. We talked about that at one of my meetings that I attend. We talk about recording. We talk about developing books. So we keep these alive to generations ahead. And it's given, meaning that it's okay to record, because the elders were approached to record. So it's okay. And I always refer to an elder from here, because we are always being careful. And I was approached to do this, a traditional giveaway dance. It's an old dance. So I approach an elder I asked him, how can I relay this? What we're gonna have, traditional giveaway dance. And he said, because times have changed, it is okay to advertise, he said, because times have changed. And referring to the values, the beliefs, they will never change. As long as we carry them by respecting. And that's what we say about water, Nibe. We have to respect it, and that's what this declaration is, respecting the water. So it has, Nibe has a spirit, Nibe is life, Nibe is sacred. We honor, respect, and love Nibe. Miia, is there anything?
That's great, Isobel. And you ended where I was going to pick up actually the conversation. So miigwech for introducing the concepts in the declaration. And those were the key. They're kind of written out separately. And I'll share my screen very briefly just to show the Nibe Declaration. It's also available on the Treaty 3 website, as well as the Decolonizing Water website. And you can see it there, and also have access to a toolkit, as well as a video that talks about the process of developing the Nibe Declaration. But you see at the bottom of the declaration document, this idea of spirit, life, sacredness, and honoring, respecting, and loving Nibe. And I think that this is where we distinguish the idea of res externa, something that's external to humans, from Indigenous conceptions of relationship with water. So I'll stop sharing my screen for the moment. Okay. So where we come from in working on the Nibe Declaration is looking at teachings, sacred law, and incorporating those into a statement of what exists already within the Treaty 3 and Anishinaabe Nation perception. So I'm really grateful today to be speaking to you from Treaty 1 territory, but have with me Treaty 3 water that comes from Shoal Lake, because Shoal Lake actually is the source of water for the city of Winnipeg. And when we think about those interconnected relationships and we start to understand water not in a singularity, but in a plurality, then I think we're getting closer to understanding Indigenous ways of viewing water. And I think that connection to understanding the plurality is also what allows us to understand spiritedness and agency of water. So there is no sort of singular. There are multiple spirits that look after water. Water also has a spirit, and we have multiple forms of water, and actually different spirited beings that brought those different forms of water to Anishinaabe. So when we take that sort of as the basic frame for understanding that relationship with water, and we accept that water is life, we need to think about sort of that phrase, Nibe onje bimatsuin, right? It's water is giving life. It can also take life. It brings life. We are born of it, and we are alive because of water. So it's not simply sort of equating the concept of water with being alive. It's this very complex idea of dependence on water. And thinking of water as external to us as humans is a false idea, because we're actually made up of water, right? And the water that's in us is part of who we are and our spirit interacting with all of the other forms of water and spiritedness that is around us. And in that, there's a deep agency. So I'm going to encourage everyone to think of a moment in time where you knew that water was in control and that you weren't. Probably the first time is the water that was in your mother's womb when you were gestating, right? And that's your first experience in connection with water in your human form. And that relationship carries on through life. So the idea of singularity of relationships, I think, is a false one. The idea of personhood of water related to certain water bodies is a really difficult one. And I think the concept of personhood, we have to be very careful, as Elder Isobel was saying, on Guamazin, right? We need to be careful, because when we have personhood in law, there's an ability to sue and be sued, right? And then we're working in sort of that corporate mindset or human mindset of rights. And where the Nebe Declaration is really focused is in stepping back from the idea of rights and stepping into responsibility. And that's an Anishinaabe legal framework, the idea of responsibility and interconnected responsibility. And that leads us to think of those multiple forms of water, the spiritedness of water, the non-boundedness and unsingular way of considering water, and how we then kind of have to break apart what Western legal systems hand us in terms of ideas like jurisdiction, which is geographically bounded, singular governments managing or governing, and single subjects like water. So there are some major conceptual issues that don't align between sort of Western thinking about water and what it is that the Nebe Declaration is actually trying to achieve in terms of affirming that sacred and special relationship. And one of the things that comes from the Declaration that's very clear is that it's not a relationship that's reserved only to Anishinaabe people. It's a frame for explaining the Anishinaabe relationship, but that everyone has that sacred relationship with water and a set of responsibilities on which they have to act. So I would say, if you're thinking about, what comes out of this discussion in the Nebe Declaration and the discussion today about the spiritedness and agency of water, what we need to think of is not sort of singular, but rather interconnectedness, relationship, relations amongst ourselves and with all other beings that are part of creation, like Elder Isobel mentioned, sets of responsibilities that we have to each other and all parts of creation. And you'll see that represented in the logo of the Nebe Declaration, which was very purposefully done to illustrate that interconnection and all of those sets of relationships that have water at the center of that relationship, or of those relationships. I think what's interesting to think about as a last note in terms of the Nebe Declaration is that there is a written version that you'll have access to on the websites that I mentioned, but there's also an oral version, an interpretation of the Nebe Declaration. What's interesting is if you read it out in English, it takes about 15 minutes, right, Isobel? 15 minutes or so. The Anishinaabe interpretation of it takes 45. So that illustrates the importance of using our language in trying to understand that responsibility. And that's something that we've emphasized and hope to pass on to future generations in terms of the importance of language and how that captures those relationships, those legal sets of responsibilities that we have. And what we've been adamant about is that that oral version is equally authoritative to the English version of the Nebe Declaration. So we have anchored, the highest level of spiritual law that continues to operate. And then we have this sort of very human form of a declaration that has an English version that is also connected to an interpretation in the Anishinaabe language that is bringing the significance of meaning of those relationships right to the fore. So I'll end on that, and thank you, Isobel, for introducing the Nebe Declaration. I look forward to the other speakers and hearing from you and the discussion that will follow. Miigwech.
Elder White. again, cognizant of time, I'm going to turn it over now to the case study number 2, which, so I'm going to try to pronounce this right. My slave is not so good. Satuke Kanasnada, which translates as the Watchman of Great Bear Lake. And I'm hoping that Mandy, Gina, and Walter are on the line. Very briefly, and apologies to Gina, I didn't have a bio for you, so I couldn't characterize appropriately. But Mandy's director of the Daniel Language Culture Department with the Daigle government, and Walter is representative of the Elders Council of the Daigle government. And again, I will mispronounce the Daigle main council, and perhaps you could characterize it appropriately. So turning it over now to Mandy Bayha, Gina Bayha, and Walter Bayha from the other side of Denende. Salutations, everyone. And talk about, hello? You may have a technical issue. Mandy,
So
Gina,
Mandy
and
and Walter
are you
can
there?
probably go ahead and start your presentation. We're just having a bit of technical issues.
Mandy, Walter? If you're having connectivity issues.
जो सतत वतस इतना कोदेगा अनेकुलो जीना गोला बागु जेला इंदरा जोतना को वतला अनेकुलो तो सत्ता वतरा दिना तनहा कोदेगा दिना तने सेखे कना शो इंदा दिना सुरी इदरे गुदिना का असी सुरी एक एरिया अनेकुलो कोता हो कोते अनोन अनिना सनन falla gut zo het ik ga echt juist doen Kulu must you can get So, hi, I'm Mandy. This is my Uncle Walter, and I'm going to allow him to speak a little bit more about the topic because he was raised by our grandfathers and lived out on the land most of his life by dog team and made this, has this beautiful connection and also the understanding of what these connections mean from our ancestors. So I'd like really for him to speak, and at the end maybe I could say a few words, but I think for the most part I'd really like him to share his wisdom. And Gina wasn't feeling well today, so I apologize, she won't be with us, and I'm just going to pass it over. Messi, thank you.
Okay, first must say I want to thank Mandy and thank all of you for giving me the honor to speak on you. This is such an important topic. and thank Isobel for her knowledge and all of you and the chair for to allow us to speak to Delane, our people, what we're doing here. I'm part of what we call Ontake Gawike, and the main council is called Delane Gawike, and both make up Delane Gutani government. And we're a government. We have lawmaking powers, just like any government. And I think right off, because we're a government, we have that changes some things that we can do, and one of them, of course, is we can move ahead and start making well, basically look at SAT2, which is Great Bear Lake, and what does it mean if we make it in person? And one of the things that's so important, and these are the kind of things that's it takes you a lifetime to learn or to understand. A lot of the concepts that we talk about here, we tend to, and this is what happens all the time, we tend to look at it through the lens of, say, the dominant society's legal systems. And sometimes it really pulls you away from the reality of our own grandfathers. You know, I have a grandfather that's looking at me right now. Mandy has a picture of him there. And one of the things I ask every day, you know, I've been on the Elders Council for a little over 2 years now. I spent a lifetime thinking that I'm protecting water and environment and wildlife. And every day today, I ask myself, am I doing what my grandfather wants me to do? Would he be happy with what we do? But anyway, I think the greatest advantage I have today, because I spent a lot of time in the dominant society. You know, I spent many years working, but my understanding of those relationships you talked about, the interconnectedness, the spirits of the water and the land and the wildlife, really comes from the language I speak. I speak my language very well. I can write it as well. So it's the language that teaches me, that keeps pulling me towards the understanding of what my grandfather understands as his relationship with the environment. And all of my life, I listened to my grandfather, and he talks about Great Bear Lake as a person. Because that was, and I never picked it up. Well, it's not that I didn't pick it up. I was so dominated in my early life working in the dominant society, enforcing laws. That's what I did. You know, enforcing forestry laws, environmental laws, land use, water, all of it. And I ask myself today, have I protected the environment? And I think that's such a beautiful question to ask yourself, because it goes, you know, because I've done that, I realized that my people, and certainly my grandfather, they're above the law. They're talking, you know, listening to Isobel and listening to the chair and Aimée, you're not talking about the legal system the way we can write laws. You're talking about spirituality. You're talking about those personal relationships that you have with water and the land and the wildlife. That today in Canada, you cannot legislate. It's above that. So what we've done in Delaney, we try to put it in go back to, we have a conservation plan called Bakker. It's basically a conservation plan of how our people, the kind of relationships they had with people. There's a lot of principles in there. Some of the things that you have on the declaration would be on there as well. And it's based, you know, and a lot of times when I speak about it, I said, we're rebuilding our relationship with wildlife. The wildlife are fine. The water is fine. The land is fine. It always goes back to us as a people. What kind of relationship you want to have with land, water, wildlife? You know, look at the history of the world. Look at the history of Canada. That's basically what it is. And every day that we sit down or when we have meetings, it's always that note where somebody would say, and this is a huge thing, challenge I had when we were talking about a conservation plan for caribou, where our elders kept saying, we can't talk about caribou. And they're right. We don't have to. They can take care of themselves. We talk about harvest, our relationship with wildlife. And here we're talking about water. Water is such a huge part of my life. And all of the Satukutene that live here, have historically lived here, you know, you can go back, I don't know, I'm going to go back 15,000 years. That's fine. But Bear Lake, there's a saying here that probably Mandy, yeah. So here right off the bat, the saying says that we depend on Bear Lake to guide us in all the things that we do. You know, travel. It's a huge part of our life, and one of the things that really interests me is that because I spent so much time enforcing environmental laws, I have a pretty good idea of what that does today in Canada. In fact, our environmental laws are probably a little more further ahead than, say, the rest of Canada, because we involve people a lot more. People make, you know, we try very hard in terms of processes to make sure that the people are involved in making decisions about, you know, if we're going to make laws about the environment or to regulate. I like those terms because you have to use that. When you use that, then you realize how my grandfather did things. When we use the term regulate water, regulate land, well, regulatory boards, I was part of that as well. Right off the bat, that is not the way that any people have done things. They don't regulate these things. The relationships they have, and Isobel put it very well, is learn to love the environment, learn to love water. If you have that kind of relationship, how can you do something that it's going to be bad for the water, for the wildlife, or the land? You can't. So in a lot of ways, you know, when I talk about it, I said it is self-regulating, but it's in a way that we can't legislate. We're not allowed to legislate that in Canada because of a lot of laws that exist now already that determines those are individual. You know, we were trying that with the Wildlife Act, and one day after about a year, a lawyer was sitting there and he said, "We can't legislate, charge somebody for disrespecting wildlife." And I was sitting across the table and I said, "Why didn't you say that a year ago? We spent a whole year trying to," and I think that was a good lesson for me, because we can't do that in our own culture as well anyway, as Dene people. You know, as a child, one of the first things I learned out in the land is I can't go to another tent and say, you know, here's the way you guys should live. That is the first rule of the Dene people, because that is very true. That's a huge part of the Dene people here. That is such a respected part of how I grew up, and I see that really being eroded a lot today because we don't bring that as much as we should. And I think this is a great, maybe in terms of how we treat or how we relate to water can be, you know, you could see that in a human relationship. And I think children, and especially me, when I grew up, that's how I learned about the environment, about how I treated my own people that I grew up with, you know, my own parents, my grandfather. And it really helps me, because when all of a sudden they're saying that, well, all of my life, they tell you that they're people, they have spirits, then you do the same thing with the environment. And I think one of the things that's so important, and Mandy, you'll have to time, you got 2 minutes here. One of the things that's so important is that, and we've listened that to as well, we have to be careful, and I think Sophie or Isobel brought it up. We have to be very careful if we make Bear Lake a person. We're putting it into the domain of the legal systems that we have today. So I think that's what he you know, I get from her telling us, and we don't want to do that. You know, we want to put Bear Lake in the realm of understanding our history as Dene people and our relationship with that, with water. And I think that might be, that we really have to look at it very carefully. But like I said, I want to highlight that the language, the Aboriginal languages we have in Canada are the ones that tell us that tell us, that give us the information about the ecosystem and how environment function. It's the language that does that. Because I asked myself one day, I speak the language, I said, where does this language come from? You know, every time I'm looking for a definition about place names, I go back to the land. And it's the land that tells you that. It's that location. And you learn, you understand land, you understand the ecosystem, you understand the environment. Somebody was saying that somebody studying environmental law, if you understand those things, our language as Aboriginal people makes you understand the understanding of the Dene people, of Aboriginal people. And all of the things that I've done, I'm 68 years old, the concepts are the same in the world of Aboriginal people. Maybe they look at, they say things different, but when you put all information together, those concepts and the ways we do things is the same. I know today, with my grandfather, you know, looking at me today, I've been part of that environment. That was what was so different with me when I became an officer to go enforce laws. I didn't do that because of the laws that I enforce doesn't allow you to do that. As simple as one of the things as Isobel said, is so important, thanking the Creator for whatever you have. And one day I said, well, why didn't we do that? Why didn't we have a Wildlife Act that says you have to thank whatever you take from the land or that harvest? It is so simple to do. All you do, you sit there, you get something, a fish, you say, thank the Creator. You say like this, where does it, who created it? I got to thank that person. And then you realize it becomes at a higher level. And that is where Aboriginal people are. And that's why it's so hard to deal with the legal systems today, because they're not there yet. Maybe one day, but certainly not today. But anyway, my time is up, and I wouldn't mind taking some questions, because I want to write it down and bring it back to my elders. And I'm really interested in the Neville Declaration. I think I'm going to read about it. Masi due, masi. I wish I could say this in my own language, but that's not possible. So.
You could have, and I could have just translated, but that would have like doubled our time there. And I just wanted to say masi to everyone who spoke, especially the elder Isobel Wake, masi cho for your prayer this morning, and for everyone who shared their good thoughts. And I just really wanted to add a small part to what was already said, which was everything. That a lot of the work that we really focus on now here in the community in terms of protection and conservation is through a program called the Guardians Program. And so we call them the Satuk Awe Guardians, actually. So it's the Great Bear Lake is the boss. Great Bear Lake is the one that guides us and who we follow. And so one of the really amazing things, I know there was a question that Aimée asked, is that knowing, you know, the time that you understood that was prominent where water was in control. And so we started these programs where we brought that paddle culture onto and our lake is huge. It's a little under 32,000 square kilometers. So it's massive. It's when you're in the middle of it, it feels like you're in on an ocean. And so as we're our younger generation are starting to bring back and revitalize our connection to the land, and the only way to do it is to be out there and to be following in the footsteps of our grandfathers and grandmothers and working, picking up the skills and understanding what their way of life is, because we cannot understand those beautiful concepts and spirituality unless we're living it and walking in their path that they've blazed for us. And so one of the really profound moments for us as young people, for me personally, in one of our paddle trips, we paddled about 200 kilometers on the open lake. And after about the second day of paddling, full day on the lake, you get onto the ground on the land, and suddenly your body's like swaying. And then you realize that you're sort of in rhythm with the water, with the lake. And when you're that close to it, and it's unmistakable what the elders are saying. And when they're talking and they're telling us these concepts, because of those experiences, we understand immediately. It speaks to our heart and our spirit because we made that connection. So a lot of the things that we do really is about, for sure, protecting the lake. But I think it's such an important part of, we need to also train our young people. We need to also bring them to help them reconnect as well and make those connections, because it's really them who are going to be passing it on in the future. So are definitely, our path moving forward is about conservation and about protection. But I think in a really deep, meaningful way, it's also about our young people walking the paths of their grandfathers and understanding these amazing concepts, because you really cannot, it's unmistakable, the spiritual connection that you have and your healing. All of these things are happening to you when you're just in nature, when you're on the land, when you're on the lake, your body just starts to balance and heal. And what our elders talk about, and what they say to us, is that when we heal, the land heals with us. So that's why we have such a focus on more, if there's an imbalance in nature, then we immediately look to ourselves, our families, our community, and we see ourselves as a society and figure out what's out of balance within our own group. And usually when we're out of balance, then it's reflected back to us. It's a sort of an indicator to let us know that we're not following the ways of our grandfathers or the Dena laws. And so a lot of our focus in the work, and mine particularly as the director for the Department of Culture, Language, and Spirituality, we really focus on what that means, about that context, that spiritual Dena Tolu, the path that our grandfathers had set for us. How do we move back onto this path of balance and connection, and about healing and spirituality, and how that really in turn has this positive impact on the community around us. So if we really love the land and we really love the water, and we're trying to protect these things, then we must learn to first love ourselves and to build those interdependent relationships we have with even the people in our own families and our friends and the people close to us. And so we practice in those ways by strengthening those relationships between each other. So merci so much for your time and for listening. Merci.
Merci, Joe, Mandy, and Walter. I have a number of questions. Just for clarity, there's some technical issues. Can people see me okay?
Yes.
Hear me okay? Voila.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to case study number 3, closing time. We have about 40 minutes from now. We're hoping for some time, as you mentioned, Walter, for questions and discussion afterwards. So I'll just turn it over to Daniel and Elder Sophia Rabliauskas. Elder Sophia is a member of Popular First Nation, and she's the coordinator spokesperson for Kamichiwawanaki World Heritage. And Daniel Gladu Kanu is Anishinaabe, Métis, and Irish from, you guys are killing me with these Anishinaabe pronunciations, Anamaki Wazing in Treaty 3. And again, I won't go through, hoping to discuss the Indigenous collective for Lake Winnipeg, after which we will move into a dialogue with 15 minutes for you guys. So, merci, Joe.
Thank you, Caleb. I think for the collective, like as the director of collective, we've just kind of started this journey as well. Looking at personhood, and I really appreciate everything we've been hearing from Elder Isobel White and Walter Bayha and Mandy and Aimée as well. So the collective looks to find ways to work together to support what is a lake that's been under siege, I guess, from a lot of the forces around Canada and from the prairies. But I think for the most part, I want to turn it over to Sophia Rabliauskas to hear some of what she has to say about this first, and at the end I can say a few more words if there's some time. So.
Okay, thank you. So the Pimachwina Key, which means land that gives life, is a name of our World Heritage Site, which was designated in 2018. So my community is Poplar River First Nations, and with the World Heritage Site, it took us nearly 15 years to put it together, and that's working with 4 other First Nations and the 2 provincial governments. But I would like to start off by saying that because I heard so much about the language, and that's the thing that we had sometimes had some problems with when we were trying to just explain our thoughts about how we perceive the world. So I'm often challenged to explain how we think and feel about our way of life in English, because with our partners in the government, we had to do that a lot. Our teachings are the very essence of all the things that are sacred to us, and that's practicing and understanding the natural laws that were passed down to us, through oral tradition. So the terms and expressions used in English don't mean the same as it does in my language. It does not connect to my emotions, heart, and my understanding about things. My language is spiritual and connects every part of my being to the earth and to everything around me, my environment. And I worked as the coordinator for the World Heritage Site project. And I was fortunate to work with many elders from these First Nations, and how they were there to remind me how our worldview, and we needed to really be firm about our how we wanted this World Heritage Site to be recognized. So one of the things that I like to share, the first thing that we had problems is it was defining the outstanding universal value. What was so great about this area, and I like telling that story because it really the 2 definitions, like our worldview teaches us one thing, and their worldview is totally different from how they perceive the world. So it was very at times conflicting, because they didn't agree with what when we started talking about spirituality, when we started talking about life of the land, how we need to respect the land and everything around us, because it depends on our life, our livelihood. So I think the elders, would say, everything is important. So it was really hard to kind of pinpoint what our outstanding universal value. So, most of the people would understand, I guess, what it is. But for us, we couldn't comprehend. We couldn't say why we had to say that something is more important than what we had here. So it's a huge challenge when working with Indigenous people whose first language is not English. But our relationship, explaining our relationship with the land, it comes from, I've heard creation story, describes that creation gave the Anishinaabe the responsibility to care for that land. And when I say land, it encompasses everything, the water, the lake, and and that's how important it is for our people to acknowledge that spirituality of that lake, of that everything on that land, because it is our way of life. We have to respect when life is taken from the land for our own sustenance. So we have to really really understand that and really practice that. Those natural laws are the foundation of everything that we do. Any negotiations that we do, we need to understand, and we can't compromise some of those, I mean, all those teachings. They were very important, and many of our elders were guidance and gave us directions on how we needed to do this World Heritage Site. It was important for them, but it is also important that we do it as to be recognized as a natural and cultural site, because we are not separate from the land. We are not separate from what's around us. The land gives us that life. The land gives us that wisdom, and the land is there, has been there for thousands of years. So we have that understanding and that sacredness, because without that land, we won't survive as people. And because sometimes the land gets developed, the water, for example, Lake Winnipeg is the waterways that has connected our communities, and we know that it has been getting sicker as the years go on. And you notice communities will start to be affected. Anything that happens to the land will affect the people in these communities, surrounding communities. And that's why it's worrisome. That's why the people in these communities are worried about what's going to happen to that life of people, life of animals, and life of medicinal plants that are still used. So protection of those is very, very important. Bridging the traditional knowledge and the scientific knowledge is very important to be able to do this. Pimatrinaki, I think when the elders gave it that name, is an understanding that the land that gives life. So anything that gives life is very important. And that's the concept that has been here for thousands of years. And that's a concept that will continue to be here for thousands of years. So it's important now to recognize that, to acknowledge that. When I hear like the definition or giving that personhood to the lake, I said, you know, as people, as Anishinaabe people, we weren't recognized as people, as persons till in the 60s. And that's going to be really hard for the government we barely got our recognition as human beings, you know, and for them to recognize something like this I think will be a challenge. But I think it's language, working with Indigenous people, and come up with some things that will help get that recognition and acknowledgement of that spirituality that is important to Anishinaabe who have lived there for thousands of years. We know that the reason why it was important for us to protect our traditional territory is not to have any development happen because of that devastation that will happen with everything that's on our traditional territory. It wasn't easy for us to do this, to work with the government, because they come to the table with different set of values and beliefs. So that's what we're always, we're going to be struggling with is that to come to that common understanding. Is it going to happen? I don't know. But we have to make them see or understand that water represents life. We've heard it from other speakers, how important it is, and how there are so much of these stories, and they bring life to that lake, you know, and the people that are part of that lake. You know, those are the things, those are the stories that need to be told. And with this, I am struggling with the definition of because of the language. And whenever I hear something in the English, I have to sort of translate that back into my beliefs and my understanding of the world and how it's going to fit in, how it's going to, because person, again, I see myself as Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe, not just Anishinaabe that's tied to the teachings of many past generations, with the teachings, with the values, and the beliefs are all ingrained into that word Anishinaabe. Same with that spirituality. There are many names that are given or recognized. We just don't use one word. There are many ways of describing things that we see as sacred, that has that spirituality. So it's important, I think, as people to recognize that our language is tied to us spiritually, and how we recognize, how we perceive the world. So yeah, I think I'll stop there and let Daniel speak. Thank you. Miigwech.
I think this reminds me that you know, when I guess when I first heard of the personhood, I was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. We should look at that. And then we had a gathering last winter, at this time, and we had many members from around Lake Winnipeg, but we also had many youth there, and we were talking about personhood. And Aimée presented that idea. And at the time, I'd been thinking of like, well, maybe it won't work or not. But one strong message that the youth brought forward was that we had to do more than that. That it wasn't enough to just say that the water is a person, but that it is so much more. And I think part of that comes from having even to right now feeling devalued as people. That our knowledge, our values, our ways of life are not seen as important, even in this legal system now. So to give that to something so important as the land, as lakes that we rely on, just wasn't enough for them. So I thought that was a good learning from youth who often can bring those kinds of messages to us too. But I'll leave that. I think that there's so much good has been said already that I'd like to hear more as we discuss further. So, Miigwech.
Masicho, Daniel, and Sophia. With that, I would ask the team, and I want to acknowledge Heather, Veronique, and Natan doing the IT to open up the chat for a discourse. I propose a 20-minute discussion. We're looking for, we have at least 3 questions, I think, in the Q&A. I'm just looking at that now. And yeah, if we could do 20 minutes and then maybe closing, maybe, a minute or less from each of the presenters to take us to 2 o'clock. And I want to do one thing very briefly. I'm trying to kind of track what was said and to set the discussion forthcoming. You know, Kat, I love what you're saying about legal personhood being a potential bridge. You know, Isobel, how you talked about, you know, one, the work to go into the Nabi Declaration, but how you translated through process those values, that the outcome, the look of it, the mechanisms might change, but the core does not. And Aimée, you know, the beauty about plurality as opposed to singularity, and this notion of especially using, like they did in Aotearoa with both the Treaty Waitangi and the Tutariti, you know, they used two treaties in different languages to amalgamate and create a more sophisticated interface for legal definition of their rights. And by extension, it seems that you have done something very profound in keeping both Anishinaabe oral, verbal, and written in parallel for the declaration, and which obviously leads me to Walter. Your comments were profound. Similarly, Masicho, Mandy, for that. You're talking about, as I heard it, this interface space between us as Indigenous people having this higher relationship and the colonial legal structure and the colonial legal mind being unable to interface with it. You know, and that's the problem in personhood, as you mentioned, Elder Sophia. You know, we weren't people, nor were women in this country's history, right? This is not a legal system that readily thinks of the other. And thus, to kind of start the discussion, and actually I just want to make one request to Walter and Mandy, if appropriate, could you share your grandfather's name? If appropriate, you mentioned him a number of times.
You got a better voice.
So his name was Joseph Bayha, and his grandfather was Isayetsa. So we have like we come from the Tati and Bayha family line. So Joseph Bayha, Isayetsa.
That's all.
That's it.
I wanted to ask you guys about the water heart. It's that too, but maybe I think that no, but like that's significant, because the story I heard when I was down in Fort Smith, a star came across the heavens and brought water to this place. And that, I mean, white man science can catch up to the truth that we hold, but there is something there. Anyways, that's heavy business, and I don't bring it up lightly, nor do I mean to be trite or simplistic. That's heavy talk. We talk about spirit. So I just want to open it up. Masicho, Sophia, and also, you know, Daniel, I like your comments about youth and bringing in personhood and challenging us to do better. And Sophia, the one point I wanted to point out that you made that I thought was really interesting in light of all the discussion we had, is that you had to fight to articulate the intrinsic value for this world heritage. Like how strange is that you have to like go through their language on their terms to define what true value is. Like that's so emblematic of colonial constructs and minds. Anyways, with that, I'd like to open it up to the tech team. Heather, Veronica, and Natan, can we just see what questions are coming in, and we'll try to do about 20 minutes if we can, and then wrap up.
The chat is open for everyone right now. And the question, I think there's a couple questions in the question box if someone wants to read them.
I could read the questions. So there's first a question. Could you speak about water being contaminated and the spirit or lack of spirit there? And the person is thinking specifically about Grassy Narrows First Nation, but I'm sure you could speak from your own experience. Would anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, can I suggest that maybe you read out like 3 or 4 questions, and then people can
Sure.
answer whatever they can.
Sure. So there's a question about contamination and spirit. So how is spirit affected by contamination, I suppose. There's a question about how can we get the youth and young advocates to further support this work, and how can we ensure that these teachings are passed on to the next generations? And somebody would also like to know more about the Nibe, sorry, I thought it was Nibe. Did I say that right? Nibe Declaration Toolkit, and wondering what the timeline is for supporting documents for how we can support the declaration. So teaching, community, water, walks, etc.
And just a chair's prerogative, I'm going to ask maybe some people from the Lake Winnipeg could talk about the spirit in that context, and maybe Elder Isobel as well, and also to Walter and Mandy. One question I have relating to the contamination in spirit relative to the water heart is the fact that the uranium for the first atomic bombs came from Great Bear Lake from the Satu. So if you guys could maybe address that. And again, we have about 20 minutes. So with the utmost respect, please be, to the extent that you can, brief but respectful of the topic. So I'd like to leave a little bit of time for everybody to do a closing comment, and then we'll wrap up. And the other questions as well. So I'll leave it to the team. Maybe someone from Lake Winnipeg, and then someone from the Satu on the pollution question.
Okay, it's a fire. The concern that that have the communities worried about Lake Winnipeg has to do with the livelihood of the fishermen. But our part as women in our Anishinaabe culture is to continue to do ceremonies to help with that spirit of water to be strong and to be healthy, and also bring attention to our governments. I know in there has been walks done by the grandmothers, and there has been like there's water ceremonies, and then sometimes these things are often overlooked, you know, when we talk about water and the importance of that. Because one of the elders had said a while back that we are forgetting our ceremonies. If we don't help with the prayers and with the ceremonies, those spirits will feel it, that nobody's acknowledging that spirit of that water. So the ceremonies need to be acknowledged. They need to be practiced. They need to be, and a lot of many of our communities still don't want to be open to that. And that's a problem that I see in many of our communities. And that's the sad part when our own people, because again, you know, a lot of our ceremonies and a lot of those things that were important part of that work as Anishinaabe people, a lot of the ceremonies were demonized, and that mindset, it's still out there. And it's so important that we recognize and acknowledge those ceremonies. They need to be done. We need to do them. We need that water needs our help. And in order to protect it from all of the toxics and with our lake, you know, that the algae that's affecting and killing the fish in that lake. So yeah, ceremonies. Thank you.
Just thinking about like the maybe it's a problem with English language a little bit, but the idea of a lack of spirit in water, even with contamination, you know, it's still, that water is not still has the spirit, that still carries that spirit, still is that spirit, and while we need to find ways to let that water heal again, it's not diminished as having spirit, and of course one of the terrible things about contamination is just how it makes it hard for us to trust the water, right? That we've relied on. That I think of when I was a young boy, I would drink from the lake, and then as I got older, I would drink less and less. I would go out and drink, and the idea of dipping a cup in the water, even now, I always wonder, like, is this okay? And I have to question that. And even though this is something that my grandpa and my father, we've just always done this, but now I see it in my son, how he's like, well, it's crazy. Why would we drink from the lake, which is our source of water? So all the more reason to really defend against this idea that you can just pollute a lake and add something to it without consequence. Like, you know. Thank you.
Merci, Joe. Maybe to our Dene delegates, if you could briefly talk about Great Barren contamination and some of that history. Cognizant of time, we have about 10-15 minutes. And I'd like to get to some of the other questions because there's a number coming in. Merci, Joe.
1 minute.
1 minute?
Yeah,
Oh.
just talk about the uranium, I guess.
Oh gosh, that's a huge. A lot of that stuff is on the websites, so you should be able to read about it. Certainly, go read the Water Heart. Contaminants is and just listening to Daniel. Remember, I said I used to enforce laws. Well, across Canada, listen to this one. We don't deal with spirits when we enforce laws, environmental laws. That's part of the problem. And then we have, the elder said, ceremonies. You know, those relations have to be kept up. The laws that I used to enforce, including Port Radium, there's a word that we use, and all you lawyers out there, and for years, and we still use it today, it's called acceptable. I have no idea. I spent 40 years enforcing law. I don't know what it means. And who made that acceptable? So we're really pushing here. There's only one case in the territories where the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board decided that they're not going to have uranium exploration in their sacred territory. And that was a huge plus for Dene people around so it's okay, but it wasn't for the process itself, because there's still a lot of people that still think that those laws we have today for environmental protection are adequate, and they're not. And Port Radium is a good example of that. We never, and I've been in environmental laws all my life. I was one of the final inspectors in 1982 shutting that Port Radium down under a land use permit. The atomic nuclear people weren't involved. And it took Daigle a long time to reconcile. You know, if you look at Bear Lake, there's nobody living in Port Radium anymore. They're as far away from Port Radium as they can get. That's kind of weird, but that's what happened. Then people didn't want to deal with the contaminants over there, so they moved to this side of the lake. But anyway,
can you tell people the importance? Can you tell people what Port Radium was and what it did? Because most people don't know where the atomic bomb really came from.
Okay, the uranium. Well, actually, the radium as well. But the Dene people have a name for that place. It's called Bequeniwa, which means, and I don't know how the Dene people know about these things, but in their dreams and their experiences with radium and uranium, know that it's a contaminant. It affects human beings. So when they mined the area, and there were so many people affected by it, because first of all, they didn't know. Well, a lot of our Dene people knew that there was the traditional stories and the stories about the dreams about a lot of our leaders. But there was a lot of people by 1940 that were working. So there's a movie that they made called The Village of Widows. You have to look at it. There's more widows than I think at that time because of the impact to the health impact to the male. And so it has a huge impact on our history. And here's the thing that I got to tell you. So one day when we're doing this project, the elders said like this: we got to go apologize to Japan because this stone or this thing came from our land. And I'm sitting there, I said, what in the world would you want to apologize? You have nothing to do with it. And then, no, it came from our land. We got to go tell them and we got to ask for forgiveness. So they did that. They went to Japan on August 6th. I think there was a day that the atomic bombs were dropped, and they asked for forgiveness. Now think about that concept. That was just, yeah, that was so far out that I didn't even get it. And that you talked about that responsibility. They said we got to go over there and tell them that. Now I tell you, nobody does that except Native people, which is incredible. And for 7 years, Caleb, we spent a lot of time on healing, getting our people to reconcile with the land, to ask for forgiveness that we went away, and they wanted to go back, and they want to apologize and ask for forgiveness and reconnect with those areas, which is concepts that institutions don't teach us. It comes from Native people, and it takes a while to understand. Yeah.
The main reason why we were the Village of Widows, because the men, our Denon men, were actually the ore carriers, and were the ones that were actually the ones directly in contact with the uranium and ore being mined. And so this is why a lot of our men had died from cancers in the successive years after the mine had closed. And the other really big impact there is that after we start covering these stories, all the traditional families, because the entire lake, our community of Delaney, the families all represent traditional territories in and around that lake. The traditional families that lived in and around that area that were from there before the mining happened, they're completely decimated. So we've lost entire families in our community because of it. And the land continues to be, it's not, there's no remediation that happened yet. And so we had 26 recommendations from the work that we did when we started uncovering these stories. And none of those recommendations at all looked at with the federal government and us. So that we're still in that process of learning about healing and things. So merci for that question.
No, Mussy Cho. So cognizant of time, I'm just going to open it up to the panelists. We have about 5 minutes. There was questions about youth engagement. If people could respond to questions about youth engagement, systemic change, I think is sort of one meta question. I'm going to give 5 minutes and then a very brief closing comment from all the panelists, and then we'll wrap it up coming up about 10 minutes from now. So open to the panelists. Youth engagement, there's some other questions. The Nibi Declaration Toolkit, concepts of water is alive into water law, which is like an interface question. How do you get colonial law and Indigenous law to interface appropriately? And the other thing I'll note is our intention was to record this, and if there's questions that come in, we'll do our best to respond to them as best we can. So to the panelists, if you guys could just jump in popcorn style, if you have something to offer, please do so.
I'll start, maybe I'll jump in and I'll do the closing comment in response to question very quickly combined together. I think picking up on the question of legal systems that, Walter, you were talking about, and that has been asked in a few of the different questions. Most Western legal systems are actually designed around not only adversariness, but also ideas of harm and reparation, right? They're less focused on ideas of prevention and maintenance. And I think that that's what Sophia was telling us. We have these Indigenous legal mechanisms that are really about preventing and trying to ensure wellness of ourselves and our environment. But those are not given value because how we think of law in Western environments and how water is regulated in Canada and territories and provinces is about this idea that, you know, there's a harm and a reparation, and that's what the law is trying to cover. And you know, the declaration itself, you know, that we've talked about isn't a law of penalties and enforcements, and we were very specific about that we didn't want to enter into that realm, but it's about individual and collective commitment to work towards Minobimatsuin, which is wellness in the Anishinaabe language, and not our own wellness, but this collective sense of wellness. So really capturing, you know, Anishinaabe legal thought and grounding it in the language, like Sophia says, and how then we become engaged in these frames of responsibilities, but also voluntary compliance, which is totally different than what Western legal systems are trying to achieve. So I think that's my big takeaway when we're thinking about personhood. It's still really in the realm of harm and reparation as it's been applied in an international context. But Indigenous legal systems really want to prevent and maintain ideas of wellness for people and environments and creation, like Isobel was saying.
Masicho Aimée. Others, in particular the elders, closing comments, responses to questions, youth engagement, contamination, spirit, translation into law.
Isobel, you're still on mute, but I think you wanted to say something.
Okay. Hear me? Okay. You know, I was jotting down some closing remarks or what could help the youth, and I'm hearing that. I'm hearing ceremonies, and also the laws. You know, laws in our Ojibwe, in our territory or our community, we call them Honji Itiwin. Honji Itiwin means don't do that, or something like that. Don't do it. Honji Itiwin. So the Creator entrusted us with laws to follow. And these are unwritten laws. So if we write these in such a way they would be understood, in such a way they could be understood. Maybe this is one way the youth, because when I was growing up there, I heard so many of them, and the common one is don't whistle at night, you know, and it's all about respect, and it's like if you do, it's harm, or else if you don't follow these laws. It's like or else, and they're not written. And I heard natural law, and I'm pretty sure that's what she meant, you know, the unwritten laws. But like I said, we need to write these laws, and how can they be acknowledged? How can they be understood in, you know, in Hamtigoji way, but for sure in Anishinaabe way, the unwritten laws. So we were given these laws, we have to follow them. Could be different laws in different communities. I'm not sure. Could be, but that's what I wanted to share. Yeah.
Masicho, Elder White. I'm going to ask, well, maybe we'll go through the list for closing comments, and if in the comments as Elder White and Professor Kraft have done, you could also respond to questions that are particular or germane to your comments. So to you, Kat, for closing comments, and I'll just go down the list as we did.
Well, I guess I just want to thank everybody for sharing these experiences. And I think my closing comments would be just from a Western legal perspective, we need to continue to be critical and like deconstruct our own legal systems to, I really appreciated what Mandy was saying, that when things are not right in nature, they look to their own relationships. And I think that that's a lesson that people in the colonial systems, societies, and worldviews need to do right now is if we're going to fix clearly with this climate crisis and water crisis, things are not right, and we need to look within our own relationships. How do we relate to one another? That's how I would end it. Thank you, Mandy and Walter, for sharing that.
Musty Chocat. To Mandy and Walter, closing comments, thoughts, reflections.
I love I could listen to you guys all day. I think you're really on a path to be real human beings. I mean, that's what my grandfather tells me. We're all human beings, and you need to do that. And it's so nice to. I wish you could see the lake. I live beside the lake, and I could drink the water. At Dan, I still drink the water right there in front of my house. And Suzuki was really amazed. Well, how do you guys do that? Well, you got to look at the history of our people, and that relationship and spiritual part is so important. That's the part that goes beyond law. We can't legislate that, but we certainly can make human beings of people, teach them to have those kinds of things. And I think, Mandy, if you want to, I want to thank everybody. I'm glad that I came here. And I want to ask Daniel. Daniel, I've met you somewhere, haven't I?
Oh yes, yeah. Some years ago, around talking about caribou.
That's right.
Yeah.
I still remember you. Must do it.
They might be cousins.
It was a really wonderful morning listening to the elders and some of the knowledge keepers on the call, as well as the people that are leading like these initiatives like decolonizing water. It was really wonderful to listen to all the stories. So Messi for sharing with us.
On your department. Mandy's going to tell you about her department. It's called what? Go tell us.
It's called education, and I appreciate it. And the department is called Edena, which means coming back into spiritual awareness of oneself. So it's this idea, these concepts that are culture, language, and like the culture, language, and spirituality are these things that bring us as human beings into spiritual awareness of ourselves. So the conversation has been so refreshing because all we've been talking about is the spiritual connection and us as human beings and these concepts of love and respect and reciprocity. And after we finished our presentation, we're like, oh, that we forgot to talk about the Satu biosphere and the IPC and the Guardians, because the really important things really were this idea of spirituality, connection, love and reciprocity, and the grandfathers, remembering those really deep, very fundamental things of who we are as, spiritual beings having this human experience. So it was, and then we, this whole idea of the water heart, and I really appreciate that Caleb bringing that up. And it is a very big concept for us in this legend that there's a living, beating heart in the middle of our lake called the water heart, Tudze in our language. And the teaching about that is that it's the living, beating heart of all water and the entire watershed. So everything is alive because this water heart beats. And so it's life-giving to everything, the water itself, the watershed, and the animals, and us as human beings that live and are connected to it. So it also gives us a Satuit in a people this responsibility to protect that, not just for ourselves, but for all people, because we all need water to live and to survive. And so, you know, when I think about when it comes to laws and how those things translate, you know, it comes back down to the very heart of all of our struggles. And as land and water defenders, advocating for human rights, it really is about systemic change. And that's what's going to need to happen in order for our spirituality and the things we talked about today to really make a space for those things is going to need systemic change, a paradigm shift within that system. How that's going to happen, I don't know. But listening to all of you today gives me a lot of hope to know that there's really amazing people that are brilliant in so many ways that can find a way through those systems, those of you that are at the forefront of that. So Masi Cho for your time, and thank you so much.
Masi Cho. Over to Sophia and Daniel for closing comments.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak. So throughout the work that we have done, protecting our traditional territory, it's just the continuation of the responsibility that was passed down to us from our grandparents, and you know, so in all the teachings that we have received, and every document that we have done, within those, you know, they're embedded with ancient knowledge, because the knowledge and the wisdom has been passed down for many generations, and things have changed. We have adapted to writing documents and working with the legal systems and trying to maintain our right as people to live in this in our territory, and to keep it the way it is, how it was, how the Creator intended us to live, and that's a big responsibility. Our people knew and had the knowledge to be conservationists, and they had those teachings. Nobody needed to come in and tell them, you know, this is how you conserve your, protect or preserve your land. They had those teachings. They knew what to do. They knew how to live off the land, and they had the skills. And this is what I think have kept us going as Indigenous people. Yeah, and I think we have to continue to find our place in when laws and policies are passed. We need to be recognized as Indigenous people who have lived here. I look around me, and you know, it's still probably almost the same as it was when my grandfather and my father were trapping. It's not by accident. It's because of those teachings that tell us we have to keep this land and preserve the land for the future generations. It does not belong to us. We have to have that responsibility, but we also have to pass on that responsibility of maintaining those teachings to our next generation. Miigwech.
Masicho. Daniel?
Miigwech to everyone who's spoken today. It's been so such a good learning for me, and I hope for everyone else too. When I think about this, you know, I think we are in ways to starting this conversation, and I think that it's important that we take the time to have it, to do it properly. You know, when some of the examples that Aimée shared with that Kat shared with the Wananui, they did indeed take many years, decades, centuries to get to this place where they could have what is still a compromise and still needs much work, but there's been other examples who heard of that story and thought that they could pass the same law in a matter of months or weeks, and and it has it goes nowhere when you rush it like that. So I think it's important that we take the time to do it right. Thank you, Miigwech.
Masicho, Daniel. So I'm going to exercise chair's prerogative and just do a very brief comment, but I wanted to say thank you, Decolonizing Water Governance, Faculty of Law, UO, Indigenous Legal Traditions Committee, Masicho, Center for Environmental Law and Global Sustainability, Northern Water Futures, Masi, the Grand Council of Treaty 3, and of course to you, Daniel and Sophia, the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective. Masicho to Heather, Veronique, and Natan, who are the tech people who are helping us behind this, and Masicho to all attending. Thank you for your participation. Shout out to Cassandra and Wasikam, Cassandra, because there's questions that maybe people didn't see, but works very hard in her language, very badass young human, and Wasikam as well, who worked hardcore on the Indigenous youth gathering that AFN held on water that I hosted a while ago. My closing comment as we end this, and again, noting Isobel, that the fire has not gone out. We don't close this with a prayer. We don't end this. I suspect this is a continuing thing, as it should be. But I'm struck by, and perhaps this wasn't clear to people, but I'll articulate it. Each of the case studies, Neville Declaration, the way the colonial legal structure tries to deal with a non-human person becoming something, the way, the Satu, the Great Bear Guardians are interfacing, and as you have, Walter, interfacing with the colonial structure, and the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective, what you're looking at is the active articulation of interface between this colonial extractive thing. And I'm wary to characterize it, because you should never give evil its true name, because then it knows where you are. It's like an old teaching from my territory in the Dunnes tradition. But what you're looking at are the interface structures. And the question, I think it was Cassandra who gave it, about youth. These are critical questions. And what I'm struck by, especially from the elders, Isobel, Sophia, and Walter, you're talking about how the individual didn't need to be reactive by reading some white man's law on paper. You were proactive because it was programmed into your DNA, because your body and your heart and your spirit and your mind walked in right relation to the other. And what I'm struck by, especially in the context of COVID-19 and billions and trillions of dollars being deployed, and laws changing actively about our ability, like there's many people on this call in lockdown circumstances, either proactively because they care for their health, their family's health, or reactively because they're told to, in Ontario and Quebec in particular, NWT. We're in a time where our relationship to each other and to the non-human, like the COVID virus, and the fact the polar vortex collapsed 2.5 days ago, and the fact that this world is changing, suggests to me that between the individual and the collective, between the reactive law and the proactive spirit, people who don't need a law to know what's right, people who don't need laws to know what's the right way, the way we use language and spirit and ceremony, and slow ceremony, not fast. I learned this in Dinétah and Navajo territory. Bad things happen fast, good things take time. And you see that with the Neville Declaration. And I suspect all the work that you've seen today, all of that work comes from deep, sustained histories. And I think the spirit of water lives on. And I think the spirit that we share in this moment, because our fire is not put out, lives on. So with that, I'm going to suggest we end. Must-see show to all the panelists, must-see show to the tech team. I'm not going to say thank you to Zoom, but they're making enough money. And most importantly, must-see show to all the people who came and listened. This is not done. This is the start of something. And I think we have to keep it going. So with that, we'll end. Thank you.